1968. Charles Bronson walked down the Champs-Élysées in Paris. They pushed and shoved to get close to him. Police had to escort him to safety. The French press called him the sacré monster, the sacred monster. He was treated like royalty, mobbed wherever he went, celebrated as one of the greatest actors in cinema. 3 weeks later, Charles walked into a restaurant in Los Angeles. The hostess asked, "Do you have a reservation?" She had no idea who he was. Nobody in the restaurant recognized him. He ate dinner alone, completely anonymous. This was Charles Bronson's reality for over a decade. A superstar in Europe, a nobody in America. How did the same actor become a god in one place and remain invisible in another? The answer reveals everything about how different cultures see masculinity, heroism, and what it means to be a star. This is the untold story of the Transatlantic divide that defined Charles Bronson's career and changed his life forever. To understand why Europe loved Charles Bronson while America ignored him, you have to understand what each culture wanted from its movie stars in the 1960s and early 1970s. American audiences, shaped by decades of Hollywood glamour, wanted leading men who were young, handsome, charismatic. They wanted Clark Gable, Cary Grant, Paul Newman. Men who smiled, who charmed, who made you feel good. American masculinity on screen was about confidence, optimism, the belief that good guys always won, because they were good. Even action heroes like John Wayne projected a certain nobility, a moral certainty that everything would work out. European audiences, particularly French and Italian, wanted something different. They would lived through World War II on their own soil. They would seen occupation, collaboration, resistance. They would experienced moral ambiguity in ways Americans had not. European cinema reflected this. Films by directors like Jean-Pierre Melville, Sergio Leone, and Michelangelo Antonioni showed heroes who were complicated, damaged, often amoral. Men who survived, not because they were good, but because they were tough, clever, willing to do what was necessary. European audiences did not want movie star glamour. They wanted authenticity. They wanted faces that looked like they would lived. Charles Bronson had that face. 47 years old in 1968, weathered from the coal mines and the war, marked by decades of struggle. He did not look like a movie star. He looked like a man who would survive, and to European audiences, that was more attractive than any Hollywood pretty boy. They saw in Charles something real, something that could not be manufactured. He was proof that cinema could show life as it actually was, not just as Americans wanted it to be. The turning point came in 1968 with Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West. Leone, the Italian director who would made Clint Eastwood a star with his spaghetti westerns, cast Charles as Harmonica, a mysterious gunfighter seeking revenge. The role was mostly silent. Charles had perhaps 20 lines of dialogue in the entire film, but Leone understood that Charles did not need words. His face told the story. Every wrinkle, every scar, every hard stare conveyed decades of pain and anger and determination. Leone later explained why he cast Charles. American directors looked at Bronson and saw a character actor, someone to play the heavy or the sidekick. I looked at Bronson and saw a monument, a face carved by time and experience. In Europe, we understand that beauty is not just youth and symmetry. Sometimes beauty is in the marks life leaves on you. Bronson's face was beautiful because it was honest. Once Upon a Time in the West was released in Italy in December 1968. It was an immediate sensation. Audiences had never seen anything like Charles's performance. The famous opening scene, where harmonica confronts three gunmen at a train station, became iconic. Charles does not move, does not smile, just stares with those cold blue eyes while the gunmen nervously wait for him to make a move. When the action finally comes, it is brutal and quick, and Charles's face never changes. He is not enjoying the violence. He is not troubled by it. He is just a man doing what needs to be done. European audiences were mesmerized. The film spread across Europe through 1969. France, Spain, Germany, all embraced it as a masterpiece, and Charles Bronson became a star, not gradually, overnight. Within months of the film's release, Charles could not walk through European cities without being mobbed. In France especially, he achieved a level of fame that rivaled or exceeded any American actor. French critics, known for their intellectual approach to cinema, wrote essays about Charles's performance. They compared him to silent film stars like Buster Keaton, actors who could convey everything through presence and minimal gesture. They called him the embodiment of existential masculinity, whatever that meant. But here is the strange part. Once Upon a Time in the West was not released in America until 1969, and when it was, it bombed. American audiences did not understand it. The pacing was too slow. There was too much silence. The violence was too stark, and Charles Bronson, still unknown in America, did not register as a star. The film came and went with barely any notice. While Charles was causing riots in Paris, he was eating dinner alone in Los Angeles. Charles found this situation absurd and frustrating. He told a reporter in 1970, "I cannot walk down a street in Rome without being followed by 100 people, but in Hollywood, I'm just another working actor hoping for his next role. It does not make sense. It is the same face, the same performance, but European audiences see something that Americans do not, or maybe Americans see something they do not like." What Americans did not like was ambiguity. Charles Bronson's characters in European films were not clearly heroic. They were violent men with unclear motivations. They killed without remorse. They operated in moral gray areas. American audiences in the late 1960s were still conditioned to want clear good guys and bad guys. Charles did not fit that mold. He was too dark, too ambiguous, too real. European audiences, more accustomed to moral complexity in their cinema, embraced exactly what Americans rejected. The financial disparity was enormous. For European productions, Charles commanded fees of $500,000 to $750,000 per film, extraordinary money in the late 1960s and early 1970s. For American productions, he was lucky to get $50,000 for a supporting role. He was making 10 times more in Europe and in America. So Charles did what made economic sense. He focused on European films. Throughout the early 1970s, he made a string of French and Italian productions. Films like Red Sun, The Valachi Papers, Violent City. Most Americans never saw these films, but in Europe, they were major events. Each new Charles Bronson film was guaranteed box office gold. The French especially developed an almost obsessive fascination with Charles. He represented something they valued: authenticity without pretension, strength without arrogance, masculinity without toxicity. Charles did not need to prove he was tough. He just was. And French audiences, particularly French men, responded to that confidence. Women found him attractive, not despite his age and withered appearance, but because of it. He looked like a man, not a boy. He looked like someone who could protect you, who would seen the world and survived it. There is a famous story from 1971. Charles was in Paris promoting Red Sun, a Western filmed in Spain. with Japanese actor Toshiro Mifune. The film's premiere was at a major theater on the Champs-Élysées. Thousands of people lined the streets. When Charles's car arrived, the crowd surged forward. Police tried to maintain order but could not. Charles was trapped in his car for 20 minutes while fans pressed against the windows, screaming his name, trying to touch the vehicle. When he finally emerged, it took 12 police officers to get him into the theater. Inside, when he appeared on stage for a Q&A, the audience stood and applauded for 7 minutes straight. Charles, uncomfortable with adulation, just stood there waiting for it to end. Later, he told a friend, "I do not understand what they see in me. I am just an actor doing a job." But French critics understood what Charles did not see in himself. French film scholar Georges Sadoul wrote in 1972, "Charles Bronson represents the death of American innocence. He is what remains after the myth of the righteous cowboy collapses. He is survival without ideology, strength without justification. In his face we see the truth that Americans cannot yet accept, that their heroes are not noble saviors, but damaged men doing what they must to survive. Europe has always known this. America is only beginning to learn." The cultural divide extended beyond film appreciation to how Charles was treated personally. In Europe, serious actors and intellectuals wanted to meet him. French philosophers invited him to dinner. Italian directors treated him as a collaborator, asking his input on character and story. He was respected not just as a star, but as an artist. In America, he was still seen as a utility player, someone competent, but not special, someone you hired to fill a role, not to elevate a film. Charles's wife, Jill Ireland, noticed the difference immediately when she traveled with him. "In Europe, Charles is treated like royalty," she said in a 1973 interview. "Restaurant owners give us the best tables. People want to shake his hand, tell him how much his work means to them. In Los Angeles, we are just another couple." Charles has been acting for 20 years, and most Americans still do not know who he is. It is bizarre to go from Paris, where he cannot leave the hotel without bodyguards, to Los Angeles, where he is completely anonymous. The paradox of Charles Bronson's transatlantic fame reveals something important about national identity in cinema. America in the 1960s and early 1970s was going through an identity crisis. Vietnam, Watergate, urban crime, racial tension. The optimistic post-war consensus was crumbling, but Hollywood was still trying to sell the old myths, still trying to convince audiences that heroes were noble and just, and that America was fundamentally good. Charles Bronson's face contradicted those myths. He looked like a man who would seen too much to believe in easy answers. Europe, having already gone through its disillusionment decades earlier, was ready for that honesty. They did not need their heroes to be noble. They needed them to be real, and Charles was as real as it got. Every role he played in European films was a variation on the same theme. A man who had been destroyed by violence, but mastered it, who operated outside society's rules because society had failed him, who survived, not through heroism, but through hardness. These were characters European audiences understood because they reflected European history. The irony is that Death Wish in 1974 finally made Charles Bronson a star in America by giving American audiences what European audiences had been seeing all along. All Kersey was the same archetype Charles had been playing in Europe for years, the damaged man who turns to violence when the system fails him. American audiences in 1974, finally disillusioned enough by their own social collapse, were ready for that character. They were ready for Charles Bronson, but Europe had been ready for a decade. Even after Death Wish made Charles famous in America, his European fame remained more intense, more respectful. In America, he was a box office draw, a reliable action star. In Europe, he was still Sacre Monstre, the sacred monster, an icon who transcended commercial cinema. French critics continued to write seriously about his work, long after American critics dismissed him as just another action hero. Italian directors continued to cast him in films that explored darkness and violence in ways American films would not touch. Charles himself preferred Europe. He gave more interviews to European press than American press. He attended European film festivals, but avoided Hollywood events. When asked why, he said, "In Europe, they care about the work. In America, they care about the image. I am not an image. I am an actor. Europe understands that. America never has." There is a revealing contrast in how Charles was treated at the Cannes Film Festival versus the Academy Awards. In 1972, Charles attended Cannes for the premiere of The Valachi Papers. He was mobbed by fans and press. Major European stars sought him out. He did a masterclass on acting that was packed with film students and professionals. He was treated as a serious artist worthy of study and respect. In 1975, after Death Wish had made him famous in America, Charles attended the Academy Awards as a presenter. He was not nominated for anything. American critics had largely ignored his Death Wish performance, and at the after-parties he was just another celebrity in a room full of celebrities. No special treatment, no recognition of his unique status, just another actor. This transatlantic divide also affected Charles's relationship with other actors. European actors treated him as a peer and a legend. Jean-Paul Belmondo, France's biggest star, called Charles his favorite American actor. Alain Delon said working with Charles taught him about screen presence and minimalism. Top American directors Sergio Leone and Duccio Tessari treated Charles's face like a canvas, building entire scenes around his silent reactions. But American actors often did not know what to make of him. He was not part of the Hollywood social scene. He did not play the industry game. He just worked. Steve McQueen, who would co-star with Charles in The Magnificent Seven, and who would become a huge star while Charles remained obscure in America, reportedly felt competitive with Charles in a way that confused people. McQueen was handsome, charismatic, beloved by American audiences. Charles was none of those things. But European cinema elevated Charles to a level McQueen never achieved in Europe. And it bothered McQueen that this rough, older character actor was treated as artistically superior in sophisticated European cinema circles. It was a reminder that American standards of stardom were not universal. The cultural differences extended to how Charles's age was perceived. In America, being 50 years old was seen as a liability for an action star. Studios wanted younger actors, but in Europe, Charles's age was an asset. He looked like a man who would accumulated experience, wisdom, scars. European audiences did not want boyish heroes. They wanted men who lived. The fact that Charles was 50 made him more appealing, not less. It meant the violence in his films was not adolescent fantasy, but the earned knowledge of a man who would seen real darkness. By the late 1970s, after Death Wish had made Charles famous worldwide, the transatlantic divide narrowed, but never disappeared. He was a star everywhere, but the quality of that stardom remained different. In America, he was commercial, reliable box office, lots of money but limited respect. In Europe, he remained an icon. His films were still treated as events. His presence still meant something beyond commercial success. When Charles died in 2003, the contrast in obituaries was striking. American papers focused on Death Wish and his action film legacy. European papers particularly French ones, wrote long analytical pieces about his contribution to cinema, his unique screen presence, his importance in the evolution of masculine representation in film. Charles himself never fully understood why Europe loved him so much more than America did. In one of his final interviews in 2001, he said, "Europeans saw something in me that Americans took 20 years to see. I do not know what it was. My face, the way I moved, the characters I played. Whatever it was, Europe gave me a career when America would not. I will always be grateful for that. Without Europe, I would have been just another character actor who never broke through." But Charles was being modest. Europe did not give him a career. Europe recognized what was always there. They saw past Hollywood's narrow definition of what a star should look like and found something more valuable, authenticity, and they elevated it, celebrated it, turned it into art. America eventually came around, but Europe saw it first. And that is why in Paris, Charles Bronson could cause riots, while in Los Angeles, he ate dinner alone. The legacy of Charles Bronson's European fame is a reminder that success depends on finding the right audience. Not every artist fits every culture's expectations. Sometimes you have to go elsewhere to be seen, to be understood, to be appreciated. Charles Bronson could have stayed in America, accepting supporting roles, remaining anonymous, dying unknown. Instead, he went to Europe. He worked with directors who valued what he brought, and he became a legend, not because he changed, but because he found people who saw him clearly.